Pablo, good afternoon. Happy to see you again at the Customs Compliance in Europe conference. I think it's your fifth time you are with us. Of course, happy to see you joining the discussions and complementing the events with your experience on the customs topic. Of course, in the customs world, one of the subjects that is still relevant is Brexit. So, what is your message for companies on Brexit and customs as things stand today?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here again at the conference and sharing experiences with the other delegates. And Brexit is still a topic, certainly on customs and trade matters. And it will be a topic for a very long time. I think is to tell companies or to make them aware that in most of the scenarios that we are going to be facing in the future on Brexit, companies will need some kind of preparation for a no-deal scenario. For example, people may think, well, if we have in the future a free trade agreement which deals with the relationship between the UK and the EU, it's fine, I don't need to prepare for a no-deal. Well, it will be a less serious scenario, but you still need to prepare because, for example, there will not be a customs union in that scenario, so you need to be prepared for having to make imports and exports to the UK. There may not be a regulatory alignment, so you have to prepare for that. Mm-hmm. So preparedness is something that should not focus only on the scenario where there is no withdrawal deal. There are many other scenarios in which you will need to prepare.
I see. And of course, Brexit is not the only cloud on the horizon. Since the last couple of years, we had a lot of disturbances in the world of international trade. Of course, the ongoing trade war. And in your opinion, how is it affecting current customs matters? And are there any customs issues which may have become more relevant now?
Well, obviously the trade war is having an impact on companies because in most of the time, in most of the cases, it will result in additional duties. But from the customs perspective, I would draw attention perhaps to two issues. One is the origin of the goods. I think companies that trade under free trade agreements or the general system of preferences, they may be already very used to deal with origin matters, with what we call preferential origin. But all these other trade measures, part of the trade war, in those cases you have to apply the rules of non-preferential origin. And this is now becoming essential. In the past, perhaps it was relevant only in the case of trade defense measures like anti-dumping, which affects a number of companies only, but now these measures imposed as part of the trade war will affect many more companies, and you really have to be very careful with the origin of your goods. In terms of legal certainty, you can use the binding origin information in the European Union and you can explore other options, but it's something you have to look at perhaps more carefully than before. And the second element which has an impact as a result of the trade war is the tariff classification of goods. Mm-hmm. I think there are a number of measures where the tariff classification is relevant to determine if you are subject to those additional duties. And while you may not have been looking at that as an importer in the past, because perhaps let's imagine that all your goods were duty-free, mm-hmm. Now maybe as a result of these additional duties, then the classification is going to be key, and you need to look into that very carefully again. So there are a number of customs matters which have resulted or have a major impact now as a result of all this trade war.
Mm-hmm. In light of what you just said, which customs issues are you currently monitoring with particular interest, which you think companies should be aware of?
Yeah, I think as part of our advisory work, I also like to monitor customs developments in legislation at the European Commission level. I'm therefore a big supporter of systems like the Trade Contact Group, which allows cooperation between the Commission and traders and trade associations. And there are at the moment two issues I think are particularly relevant. One is the customs valuation. Customs valuation is a very complex area where we do not have, I believe, enough guidance from either the Commission or the national authorities. And there is now a piece of guidance on the Commission's website, but this is being reviewed by the Commission, and we are actively participating in that review. And I think I encourage companies to take part of that review, because I think it may help to bring clarity to a number of issues, including even royalties and customs value, which is a very complex matter. There is a second issue I monitor at the moment, which is the guidance on preferential origin, which are being prepared by the Commission. And that I think it's important to know what will come up in those guidance, because that will determine in the future how these rules will be applied. And perhaps even going back now to the issue of customs valuation, as you may know, the Commission is or continues with the proposal to have valuation rulings in the future. So the process is ongoing, and I think that will be very helpful for companies, and it should also be monitored very carefully.
Good. So, Pablo, which challenges do you face in your customs practice when dealing with companies? Do you have any message for companies with regards to customs matters?
Yeah, I think over the years it has been a challenge sometimes, in some cases, to show the relevance and the importance of customs matters within the company, and increase the attention given to compliance programs that should include also customs matters. Because sometimes I may be confronted with situations where the compliance policy of the companies include many different areas, but not customs matters. And I think little by little companies start to recognize the importance of customs compliance. And perhaps one of the consequences of Brexit is that it has brought customs issues to the table. And now I think more and more companies are aware of the importance of these issues. And so in addition to increasing compliance on these issues, I think I also try to encourage companies to participate in the decision-making process at the Commission level, for example. This is something I take also very personally, because I think sometimes it's worth spending some time now on a piece of legislation which is being discussed, which may not have an effect maybe tomorrow, but it may have an effect in 1 or 2 years, and then by the time you realize it's more difficult to change. So whenever there is a possibility to deal with matters and to have an impact in the decision-making process, I think companies should make use of that opportunity.
Okay, well, of course, all the companies are trying to achieve 100% compliance always. But your presentation was focusing and talking about situations when the government thinks there may be a transgression, or perhaps there was a transgression. You talked about Olaf and investigations. Could you briefly give us a summary of your presentation?
Yes, I think the presentation was about Olaf investigations, about the role of Olaf in customs and trade investigations, and what I would like to, or what was the purpose of the presentation, was to make companies aware of how Olaf operates, how it can conduct investigations that will have a huge impact on your supply chain, give also some tips about how you can defend yourself if you are involved in an Olaf investigation. And I think the session also led to a discussion in general about customs investigations, which we are seeing more and more often throughout the European Union. And at the end of the presentation, I also wanted to draw attention to the European Public Prosecutor Office, which will be in place in the near future, maybe next year or 2021, which will also play an important role in customs investigations. And I think companies should be aware of that as part of my idea that you need to know what's coming in the near future, that even if it's not for tomorrow. And I think we have a good discussion in the session. There were quite a number of questions in general about how to perform an audit, how to react when you have an investigation, whether it's from the national customs authorities or whether it's from Olaf.
Right. Well, indeed, I think we had a brilliant discussion during your presentation, and I would like to thank you again for coming down and for talking to us, the audience in the room and at home, and hope to see you next year.
Well, thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure as usual, and I hope to see you next year again and have an interesting discussion again as usual. Thank you.
Thank you.